Uh, well, Paul, nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, and I know we've been collaborating our organizations in particular around a plastics call that we're doing for our funding, and we're very excited what you've been bringing to the table and helping us socialize plastics. So, from our perspective, tell us what CPC. Oh, let me do that over again. Tell us about CPP and what you've been up to for the last few years. It'd be great for our members to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So I think we recognize in Canada as the world has sort of come to the realization that we have a problem with plastics, and more specifically with the plastic that is entering the environment and ending up in places where it shouldn't be. We produce an enormous amount every year of packaging and other types of materials that are very useful for and have benefits for our economy and for food and other items. But very little of that today is making its way back into the supply chain and actually being recycled. I think in Canada, some research shows that about only 12% of plastic packaging is effectively being recycled today, and only about 1% of flexible packaging and films, which are things like plastic bags and pouches. So, the issue is there. Governments have been stepping up, and private sector and industry have been stepping up, and really that's what led to us launching the Canada Plastics Pact in early 2021 in February.
Okay.
And what the Plastics Pact is, it's a network of organizations that have aligned around the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Global Plastics Pact network. And we're essentially run as an initiative of the Natural Step Canada, which is a not-for-profit charity based in Ontario. But we're aligned around sort of this unique multi-stakeholder collaboration platform that's bringing diverse players together, experts across the plastics value chain to really rethink the way we design, the way we use, and we reuse plastic packaging to ensure that plastics are sort of kept in the economy and out of the environment. And we're made up of about 90 partners right now working across that value chain and focused on some very clear targets to 2025. We're actually a pact that's one of 15 global pacts around the world. So the US has a plastics pact, India just launched a plastics pact, Mexico, Europe, and other countries are actively embracing sort of this harmonization approach. And the 4 targets that we're focused on include sort of defining a list of plastic packaging that is to be designed and designated as problematic or unnecessary, and take measures to eliminate those by 2025. The second target is really focused on efforts to ensure that plastic packaging that's on the Canadian marketplace is 100% recyclable or compostable by 2025. The third target is around sort of undertaking ambitious action to ensure that at least 50% of the plastic packaging that is on the market is actually being recycled or composted by 2025, so that we have the infrastructure in place for the collection and the sorting and recycling in place. And then lastly, it's to ensure that at least 30% of all plastic packaging by weight by 2025 has recycled content. So kind of driving demand for the recycled materials and secondary loops from that perspective. And then lastly, just mention that we launched a roadmap earlier in this year out to 2025 that's sort of focused on 3 priority areas. One around sort of reduce, reuse, and collect, and that looks at models like reuse to help understand, we need a full suite of solutions to actually reduce the amount of packaging and deal with the issues around recyclability. The second one is around optimizing the recycling system, and that's making sure that standards are in place and the infrastructure is there for the collection, sorting, etc. And lastly, we need better data, and that's the priority is to better understand how the system's working. And we've got 8 working groups that are focused on driving those roadmap priorities. So yeah, lots of work underway, and a pretty active group of those 90 participants and partners helping to drive towards our sort of 70 key opening moves in the roadmap.
That's fantastic. There's a lot going on since 2021, and kudos to you and the team for bringing that together. I'm a big fan of, you've got your goals and your metrics. You've got quite a few partners. I have taken a look at that, and I know that includes CPG and food and beverage in that mix. So that's also positive and an indicator that we're seeing folks from the food sector, join CPP as well. And I suspect if people want to learn more, they can jump on the webpage or reach out to you guys directly. Today, of course, we want to talk a little bit about food and beverage specifically. And as you're aware, we're launching a call for proposals around innovations to try and spur on the reduction in use of plastics, which are, for many good historic reasons used in the food and beverage industry. They do prevent food waste. They provide barriers, they provide information in terms of marketing, competitive advantage and those types of things. However, there's still obviously, as you mentioned, by those, quite frankly, staggering stats around what's actually recycled and versus what's not. I'd like to sort of dive in as experts in the plastic. What are some of the ways food and beverage companies can innovate to reduce or eliminate plastics today? And I'm always kind of curious about, maybe, is there a particular myth that you could bust in there where, you might hear, hey, it's really difficult, and you kind of go, well, no, not necessarily. But even also like a success story. I'm a big fan of modeling off of success stories to help, show people the path forward around innovation in this space. Anything you can share on the food and beverage space?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of great examples, even just coming out of the CPP partnership and some pilot projects and things, and I'm happy to share some of those. But I think just in general, in terms of, the innovation space and how we're seeing companies sort of come to rethinking their packaging and, the life cycle of their package and the types of materials and formats, etc. Well, we know that there's, a huge variation, right, in terms of the resin types and the applications for the packaging, that help to support the performance, whether it's, a need for things like vapor barriers or others, or the, ability to have labels and adhesives, the shapes and the sizes. So really understanding sort of the performance is where the innovation comes in, to make sure that we can still maintain similar performance characteristics, but come up with materials and resins that are easier to process at the end of the day, easier to collect and sort and actually recycle, and actually get a pure stream coming out of it at the back end that has lower levels of contamination, etc. So that can be reintegrated sort of with recycled content and new packaging. So really, we've been embracing the golden design rules at the Canada Plastics Pact, which were launched, as you might be aware of, by the Consumer Goods Forum. Really, that's 9 different sort of guidelines that are part of the golden design rules. Originally developed by 41 sort of global companies to help them rethink their packaging and think about how they design for recyclability and actually work with sort of the processing side. And so at CPP, we've been working to help our members adopt those. We've been providing training around that, and that's helping to spur some of the innovation that's going on. I would say that the strategies that we're seeing being adopted maybe from the food and beverage sector in terms of the innovation is upstream around design, like I said, for recyclability, and replacing things like multi-resin laminates and flexible packaging or pouches with mono-resin, things like polyethylene or polypropylene to go in that direction. We're seeing kind of the retooling of equipment and others to focus on using polymers that are more sort of economically viable, like PET and polyethylene, or removing sort of colors and dyes that can create issues downstream for recyclability. We're seeing a focus on lightweighting, so focused on reducing the volume of plastic per unit sold, and coming up with new designs there as well as compostability and opportunities to look at substitutes and alternatives. So there's a lot of innovation going on in that space. There's also some really cool stuff going on around elimination. So things like edible or dissolvable packaging and things and materials. It's almost eliminating the need for plastics altogether in that space, but it still has the ability to protect foods like cucumbers or other things in the grocery store. I would say that linkage with the post-consumer recycled content and linking in the ability to reintegrate those resins as sort of recycled content is a big focus of innovation, including on the upstream side for some of the resin producers. And lastly, I would say we're seeing a big interest and uptake in the use and interest on reuse models. So
yes,
ensure the infrastructure is there. How do we change sort of the consumer behavior in this space? How do we make it easy and accessible? So lots of innovation going on with some very cool business models around reuse and retail.
Yeah, well, to be honest, and I love hearing that. So thanks for sharing all of those elements. We're even seeing in our network organizations with new reuse models. So it's not substitution, but certainly elimination models. And that's always kind of neat because it, you know, it upsets a little bit the way of thinking normally about plastic. And that's always great to sort of challenge some of the traditional ways. But we're also seeing organizations and companies looking to bring in new materials to their traditional process or processes. We're even seeing folks actively reaching out on our online platform, Yodel, trying to find pilot tests and groups to take on and trial some new materials. So that's fantastic. So there's certainly, you know, we're seeing an appetite for it, and I think that hopefully is you know, music to your ears as well on that side. So one of the things you mentioned in there, and it's kind of a lead into one of our next questions, is this golden design rules for plastics. I'm sure there's a link to that on your webpage if people want to find out some more about that. But you know, is there any specific golden design rules that you've seen implemented in the Canadian market, either food service, retail, that are out there as an example that might be worth highlighting, how those design rules have helped propel something through to, again, a success story?
Yeah, so definitely check out the microsite that's on the CPP website for the gold design rules, and we've actually come up with some Canadian guidance there that's specific to
fantastic
applying the golden design rules. So I mean, there's a couple areas. So one is around sort of the redesign, as I was mentioning earlier, and some of that lightweighting process, where we're seeing companies like Club Coffee. It's one of the largest coffee roasters that makes sort of sustainable packaging in North America, have really worked to adopt as many of the GDRs as possible. One of the things they've done is to look at design changes to their coffee packaging that reduce sort of the use of plastic by about 48% compared to sort of a similar foil sort of quad seal bag that is sort of an 83% industry average in that sense. We're seeing Coca-Cola, another sort of global member, but also a member of the Canada Plastics Pact, that are rolling out bottles made from 100% recycled PET plastic.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned how some companies are eliminating dyes or coloring. Sprite, for example, is transitioning from green to clear plastic use in their bottles to allow for, you know, a better reintegration at the end of life of those bottles to be made into new beverage bottles. Bimbo Canada, who's a sort of a leading bakery, we're seeing kind of interesting changes, you know, switching to cardboard clips instead of plastic on their bags. So those are kind of small changes, but when you notice them, they're kind of striking. Oh, okay, things are happening in this space. And then we've had some really interesting work come out of the working group collaboration. So there is golden design rule number 6, which is around kind of increasing recycling value in flexible consumer packaging. So that's like pouches and potato chip bags and grocery bags and other things that would be considered in that space. And we're seeing collaborations between companies like Nova Chemicals and EFS Plastics, who have come together to develop monomaterial PE polyethylene pouches with 20 to 30% recycled content for applications, in some cases food. The Alberta Beverage Container Recycling Council has been working with Interim on another pilot where they're taking recycled drink pouches, which have historically been fairly hard to recycle, to cryogenically freeze those and then ground them into small pieces that are then fed into sort of a chemical recycling process to extract the basic polymers back out, so they can be turned back into new containers or new flexible packaging in that sense. And then we're also seeing kind of the reuse side as well, which is less on the GDRs, but more kind of innovation with companies like Friendlier and Sharewares in Ontario and BC, respectively, rolling out some very innovative sort of infrastructure and like digital platforms to support their washing and collection facilities.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting sometimes, like those digital technologies, the back-end software is as much the opportunity around the reduction as the material itself. We've seen that too in some of the applications for funding on our side. An example we've seen through the Canadian Food Innovation Network, and we ended up funding a project, is changing the stickers that you would see on fruit,
Right.
to be fully compostable and meeting the highest requirements globally, so that it can go anywhere, right? Something you might find on a banana or a grapefruit or an apple, for instance. It's one of those things that you don't necessarily think of every day, other than when you're trying to peel it off your food before you go to eat it. But where does that go, right? And it's just
Millions of
sometimes.
pieces of fruit, it starts to add up.
Absolutely, right. And so that's a really interesting example. So that's out of a Eggtronic Control Systems, which is a group based in Ontario. So that's a really exciting one from our side as well. So this has been fantastic. So from a CFIN member perspective, well, what do they do to learn more about Canada Plastics Pact? And is there anything in particular you would point them to from a food and beverage perspective in terms of a resource, maybe insights? Perhaps it's consultants, perhaps it's technology firms or testing groups. What can you do for a food and beverage person?
Yeah, I mean, we're made up of a number of retailers and food value chain players right across the perspective. We're also working really closely with other industry associations like the Canadian Produce Manufacturers Association and others. So we're working with them on roadmaps around how we get to more recyclable, flexible packaging for food, for example. But all of these sort of pieces of work are kind of rolling out over the next few years in line with our roadmap to 2025. So I would say definitely go to the website, check out our roadmap itself and the key opening moves, and you can sign up there as part of our mailing list and get updates. We put out a monthly newsletter, and there's always upcoming events or releases of reports and information that could be helpful for the food and beverage sector and industry. We have a baseline report that we published earlier this year that talks about where we started from, but it gives some great case studies and pilot projects that might be of interest. And then we'll be putting out an annual report every year on progress towards our targets and giving more examples of pilot projects and scale up of those sort of work. And then there's that microsite, as I mentioned, on the golden design rules, and you can learn a little bit more about those just by checking that out on the website. And feel free to reach out to the info@plasticspact.ca, and we'll make sure the right person gets any inquiries, and happy to connect you that way. And also through our social media. So we have a LinkedIn and a Twitter page, etc., at Canada Pact.
Yeah, perfect. Lots of ways to do that, and that's exciting. And Paul, really thank you for the conversation today. I know this is going to be valuable. It's always fantastic to hear positive models and examples in play. That is sometimes the impetus required for others who are trying to find collaborators and pilots. We know there's lots of innovation going on in the food and beverage sector, and hope to continue to be part of that story as we look to reduce some of these challenging plastics. So thank you very much for this conversation today.
Thanks, Joe. It was a great opportunity. Look forward to staying in touch.
Yes, thanks.